Well, let's speak now to Al Jazeera senior political analyst Marwan Bishara, who joins me on set now. So, Marwan, the whole purpose of this trip by the U.S. Secretary of State, which is now winding down, was to kind of clarify U.S. policy in the region, particularly after that sudden decision by President Trump on troops in Syria. Yet now his boss in Washington is once again tweeting threats to Turkey this time. I mean, it almost seems as if we've come back to square one again.
Well, look, I mean, there is a strategic decision, that's for sure. So, I mean, let's leave a bit the rhetoric, the style aside. There is a strategic decision to draw down / withdraw eventually the troops from Syria. And I think that's a bit of a Trump's commitment during the campaign. It's Trump's commitment to his base. And in fact, this is Trump's mindset. Let's withdraw. Even today, he said something about let's end all wars and so on and so forth. So this is his mindset. Now, when you talk about style, and especially the way he addressed the Turks and the way the Turks now are responding to him, look, I mean, allow me a bit of leeway here. This is a man who feels boxed in. He feels more and more pressured by the public opinion, the media, the international community. He feels more and more pressured by crises of his own making. He hasn't golfed for a long time.
You're talking about the shutdown and the investigations back home and all that.
He hasn't golfed for a long time. And he says, they're all out vacation except me, I'm stuck here. And he even says, I'm alone in the White House. You know, you would be surprised. He says, I haven't left for months, even though he was in Iraq just a couple of weeks ago, right? But for him, leaving means he hasn't been golfing, he hasn't been doing vacationing and so on and so forth. So I think he's been sort of getting out his anger on whatever comes out next. The fact that he would be asked if he is a Russian agent, you know, tells you how much pressure he's under. So as soon as something like that comes up, like the question of Syria, Turkey, and whatever, he says things that are so overblown and exaggerated in style that I think everyone, including the Turks, have already said that he's probably more speaking his base and speaking his spirit than he's actually being diplomatic.
So on the foreign policy issues, then he met with the Saudi Crown Prince and the King there. No doubt they must have discussed the Khashoggi murder, but it's certainly in public they are sticking by the Saudi leaders.
There's clearly a public discourse and a private discourse, and you know, if the private discourse is anything similar to the public discourse, they would have probably had a press conference in Riyadh. They did not have a press conference in Riyadh. Why? Because whatever it is, they're not discussing it in the open. Whether they are totally and utterly complicit, including in the killing of, and including in the war in Yemen, whatever, they're not going to come out and say it in the open. And if they are, you know, having a showdown over the question of Yemen and Jamal Khashoggi, they also wouldn't be doing a press conference. So I think now we know for more or less for a fact that publicly the United States supports Saudi Arabia unconditionally. Privately, Secretary Pompeo keeps saying, and he just tweeted, that in fact he is questioning, putting pressure on the Saudis to come out clean on the question of Khashoggi. We don't know how clean they will go because it's Mohammed bin Salman that's responsible on both cases, which is a contradiction in term. And on the question of Yemen, trying to end the war in Yemen. So you could say that all in all, Hazem, this trip that started on a bit of a low note, low point in the speech in Cairo, and ended up with, you know, sort of a better atmosphere in Doha and perhaps a little more diplomatic pressure in Riyadh, it shows, if anything, that the United States, aside from the confusion and the contradiction of the statements and of the various positions within Washington, it has lost influence, it has lost leverage, and it has lost, to a large degree, certain credibility in the Middle East that started with Obama and it's continuing with Trump. And I think Pompeo's visit, although if you look at his Twitter feed, it's all wonderful pictures. It's almost like a family album of his visits in 8, 9 countries. But in fact, the leverage and the influence is nothing like what it used to be 20, 30 years ago.
One of the main things he wanted to do as well was to present a united front against Iran. But it's obviously difficult for him to do that with this ongoing blockade by a number of Arab countries against Qatar, which again he talked about when he was here in Doha yesterday.
Absolutely. And you know, here it's a bit mesmerizing for me. I mean, either, as I just said, there's really no credibility, no leverage, no influence, or there is some leverage, because at the end of the day, this is the United States of America that just claimed, by its president that Saudi Arabia or other Gulf countries cannot survive 2 weeks without it. So it certainly, I think Pompeo could have resolved, or President Trump for sure, could have resolved this issue from a phone call from the White House. So the fact that he comes here, still there are results. Either there's no leverage whatsoever, or they're not very serious about ending this Gulf crisis. Either way, I think Doha and Washington have turned the page. They've turned the corner. It doesn't matter what Abu Dhabi and Riyadh think anymore, or Cairo for that matter, because strategic relations, economic relations, commercial relations between Doha and Washington have never been stronger than they are today.
All right, good to speak with you as always, Marwan Bishara.